I want, let's see, is this, it's on, okay. I am mostly here not in my role as president of the Mid-America region, but I do want to take a moment as president of the Mid-America region to welcome you as a congregation. You're the newest member congregation of Mid-America region in the UUA, and I want to really extend to you the way that we're so glad that you're one of 4 new congregations in Mid-America recognized by the UUA board this year. I want to invite you to come to our regional assembly in Chicago next month, April 17th, 18th, and 19th, where we'll actually be recognizing our new congregations. But I'm here today, so I just want to say welcome and congratulations and thank you for all the work you've done to build this congregation. Yesterday we sort of looked a little bit at all the stuff that had happened, and it's wonderful to see the good work that you have done. Some of you have probably heard of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, some of you may not have. He is a South African religious leader. He is an African native, and so during the apartheid time, he was one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement with Nelson Mandela and many other people. After the apartheid regime fell, he was the person who the new government, led by Nelson Mandela, asked to lead the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, which listened to the stories of victims of apartheid and other victims during that time, and also to the stories of the perpetrators. Archbishop Desmond Tutu is somebody who knows an awful lot about human experiences of suffering. And in his book, God Has a Dream, he distinguishes between 2 ways that our suffering can impact us as humans. One way he calls embittering suffering, and that's the suffering that causes us to isolate ourselves from others, even the people who love us and would reach out to us and try to be with us and support us. The other kind of suffering that he talks about, he calls ennobling suffering. And that's a form of suffering where, in response, we open ourselves to others. We find ourselves connecting more closely with the people who want to love us and support us. And in some cases, we even find ourselves establishing connections and relationships with those who have harmed us, who have perhaps even caused our suffering. Now, one Easter when I was in Carbondale, I expressed the thought that one of the reasons the crucifixion is has such resonance and duration as a story. I mean, lots of people got crucified during Roman times, but there's this one crucifixion that people are still talking about 2,000 years later. One of the reasons that that might have been the case is that it might be the first time in Western religious traditions or literary traditions where suffering was presented in a way that connected people. That it was perhaps the first presentation of what Desmond Tutu, 2,000 years later, has called ennobling suffering. And so I invited members of the Carbondale Unitarian Fellowship to think about this and to let me know of other concepts, other places they thought in the literary traditions of the West or in the religious traditions where they felt there might be some example of ennobling suffering. And they came up with lots of ideas. If you know them, you wouldn't be surprised. Probably if we asked the question here, come up with a number of ideas. One of the ideas they suggested was the story of Penelope, as it's presented in the Odyssey, the Greek epic poem about Odysseus. Now, Penelope is Odysseus' wife. So let me tell you, just in case you haven't read the Odyssey, maybe ever, or you didn't read it in preparation for this morning, a very short summary of the Odyssey. It's an epic poem attributed to the Greek poet Homer. It dates from at least the 6th century before the Christian era, 6th century BC for some people. And it tells the story of Odysseus after he leaves Troy at the end of the Trojan War. It's his story of 10 years of sailing to get back home to Ithaca, the part of Greece where he lives. The story sets out, he sails off the Trojan shore with a fleet of ships filled with seasoned veteran soldiers of the 10-year war, And at the end of the book, he's the only one that actually makes it back to Greece. During the 20 years he was gone, 10 years during the Trojan War, 10 more years on his journey back, his wife Penelope has honored their love and commitment for each other. And in spite of the fact that he's 10 years, well, say 9.5 years overdue, and all the other Greek leaders have made it back, and no one knows what happened to him, but she remains faithful to him in spite of the fact that their house is now filled with a bunch of suitors, young or middle-aged men who would like to marry Penelope because both she's, thought to be very attractive. She's sort of the queen of Ithaca, you might say, and it's a rich household, and if they marry her, they get all the goods of the household and everything. They show up. They are not good guests. They, insist on having feasts every night and all kinds of things like that. And they keep badgering her to marry them, not, marry me, not that guy, marry me, not that guy. She doesn't want to marry any of them. But her main suffering comes from her sense of loss of Odysseus and her concern for him. Now, to follow what happens, I have to give the story away, so spoiler alert kind of thing they say these days. You do need to know that at the end of the story, Odysseus gets back, and he and his patron goddess Athena, who's the goddess of wisdom, and a few helpers who are faithful to him in Ithaca, they come together and they kill all the suitors. Remember, this is from 2,600 years ago or so. Yeah, this is the morality of the time, whatever we may think of it today. And if we think about that morality, it makes sense to begin by thinking about the fact that there are these gods and goddesses all over the place in Greek mythology. There are galaxies of gods and goddesses. The most powerful ones are the Olympians. Athena, Odysseus' patroness, is one of the Olympians. The most powerful Olympian, of course, is Zeus, hurls thunderbolts at people. And there are lots of other sort of subordinate gods and goddesses. The morality of the Olympians is what I'd call a pretty immature morality. It centers on self-gratification. If they see something they want, they take it. If they see something they don't want somebody else to have, they try to destroy it. It's very violent. It's very careless in its actions. It doesn't think about, oh, what impact will this have? It thinks about, oh, I'd like to do that, and I've got the power to. Human action is dominated by the wills of the gods and the goddesses. If a god or a goddess tells you to do something and you're a human being, you have no choice. They tell you to go sail someplace, you go sail someplace. They tell you to throw somebody off the boat, you have to throw the person off the boat. But when humans are left to themselves, it actually gets a little bit better. The human morality of the Odyssey values a very deep form of hospitality, a huge generosity to visitors, and a caring for visitors in distress, as well as a commitment to honor one's promises to the very best degree that one can. But it's not a perfect morality. The humans in the Odyssey understood justice primarily as retribution. It's an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth kind of justice. And they accept violence as a perfectly appropriate first response for an insult or an injury. Now, what about Penelope? The Odyssey tells the story of Penelope's suffering. She's been separated from a husband she loves for 20 years. She knows nothing about whether he's still alive. If he's alive, is he safe? If he's alive, will he ever return? She's continually hassled and hounded by this group of suitors who are eating her out of house and home and badgering her to marry them. And on top of that, she's a single parent. A son was born to them just before Odysseus left to go to the Trojan War, and now he's 20 years old. Now, I don't know what it was like being a single parent 3,000 years ago, but today, as someone, my wife is occasionally out of town for some period of time, and all of a sudden, single parenthood means something significant to me. Penelope is a very noble figure. She behaves consistently with grace and dignity. Nobody in the Odyssey has anything bad to say about her. She does engage in an act of deception. She tells the suitors at one point that she won't marry anyone until she finishes weaving the funeral shroud for her father-in-law. And she works on it during the day, and at night she unravels what she has woven. And she's hoping that Odysseus will return before she finishes the shroud or before somebody catches on. And she does get caught. One of her servants gives her away. And this kind of highlights the fact that in those times, in that culture, a widowed woman had very few real options. One of them was to marry again, and her new husband would kind of take over whatever goods the old husband had. She might decide not to marry, and she could live with a male relative, with her father perhaps, with her son perhaps if he had an established household, with a brother perhaps. Or she might do something like become a priestess in a temple, or she might become a wandering mendicant, that is, someone who travels and lives off the generosity of others and perhaps is in some ways a kind of a spiritual presence to people. But Penelope wants to wait for Odysseus to come home. So after the funeral shroud idea doesn't work, she continues to be pressured. She comes up with a new plan. She says, I will marry the one of you who is better than Odysseus is at archery. And part of that involves stringing his bow, which is a very strong bow, so you have to be really good at that. And she's hoping that none of them will be able to string the bow or to hit a mark that he hit before he left. She is noble, and she is suffering. And the question is her suffering ennobling suffering? Does it connect her to others more deeply? Or does it tend more to isolate her and perhaps to embitter her? Now, in my own reading of the Odyssey, Penelope is deeply connected to her husband, even though he's far away. She's deeply connected to their son and to her father-in-law. And she has some relationships with faithful servants. But it doesn't seem that she's connected to a larger group of people by the suffering. Perhaps she comes to the threshold of suffering because even though the suitors kind of drive her crazy, she continually treats them in a civil and respectful manner. She never tries to kick them out or anything like that, though I think she wishes they'd go home. But she doesn't really ever express a sense of connection with them. And I tried to think, what might it look like if she had expressed that sense of connection that I think would embody what Desmond Tutu is talking about. And I took the great liberty, and I apologize to Homer in advance, but I drafted a short address that Penelope might have used if she had wanted to express a sense of connection to those suitors. And Barbara is going to read that for us in her voice.
Oh, unhappy suitors, just as you long for me, and to possess the many goods of this high-roofed house, so do I pine for Odysseus, the partner whom I love. As you wonder when I will choose one among you, and grow impatient and frustrated with my delay, so do I yearn to see the sails of his black-hulled ship on the horizon, and suffer each night, awaiting news of his return, or may the gods prevent it, his death. In our anxiety and in our yearning, we are family, though our parents and our houses are different.
We might ask who else suffers in the Odyssey. And a better question would really be, who doesn't suffer in the Odyssey? Practically every human character experiences pain and suffering in this epic poem. Odysseus, the central character, certainly suffers. His travels are filled with peril, danger, and hardship, one after another. He feels keenly his separation from Penelope and their son Telemachus, and his homeland, Ithaca. Over the course of the story, he loses his entire band of Ithacan followers, and he's their leader. He feels a sense of responsibility and guilt for their suffering and loss. In both the earlier epic, the Iliad, which tells the story of the Trojan War, and in the Odyssey, Odysseus is generally acknowledged as one of the most intelligent and creative and tricky of all the Greek leaders. Supposedly he was the one who thought of the Trojan horse idea. Resourceful Odysseus is the term that the narrator of the story usually uses when referring to him. From my perspective today, which probably isn't fair to Odysseus, but from my perspective today, I'm surprised that as resourceful and creative as Odysseus is, he doesn't seem to understand what I would call the cyclical nature of violence, and how enmeshed he is in that cycle. In the Odyssey's final chapter, after all the suitors have been killed, Odysseus' son points out, you know, we killed them, and now their relatives are going to have to come and kill us, because that's how justice works. Now, fortunately, as the story goes, Odysseus has a patron goddess who's very powerful. She goes around and wipes out the memories of those sons in their families. So the story ends happily by magic. So, you know, kind of it's good to have a goddess. Now, Odysseus, who suffers the loss of so many friends, comrades in arms, through cycle after cycle of violence, doesn't seem to learn. He continues to inflict violence on others. From my point of view, it seems at least conceivable that he, resourceful Odysseus, favored of Athena, goddess of wisdom, protector of cities and civilized life, might have tried something different. He might, for example, have implored this powerful goddess to help him punish the abuse of the suitors at a suitable level, rather than supporting him in their wholesale slaughter. Someone who'd been through as much pain and suffering as Odysseus had been, and who was as intelligent and resourceful as he was, might possibly have thought about asking his patron goddess something like this.
Oh, dread goddess, radiant among the Olympians, for my part, I honor your fierce anger, and I know that of all the Olympians, you are quickest to see when a new plan is required. Your anger at those suitors who have despoiled my house and ravaged my flocks beats also in my own heart. Yet I find there another feeling of equal power, contending within me and calming my troubled soul. For each of these suitors, Antinous, Eurymachus, and Amphinous, and all the others, each one of them has left his parents and loved ones to venture here for Penelope's hand. Like my father, Laertes, like my wife, Penelope, and my son, the thoughtful Telemachus. Each of these suitors has family awaiting his return, anticipating with joy the day that he re-enters his father's high-roofed house, whether successful or unsuccessful, in his quest for the hand of Penelope, fair and righteous, shining among mortal women. Hear me, goddess and patroness, and let us devise a plan that gives me justice, yet spares their families the pain I have known. For I cannot say that I have been blameless in my own conduct these 10 long years since we left the Trojan shores. Along my way I have received the generosity and mercy of others, and a voice I hear, still and small, within me, calls me to share the mercy I have received from some whom I have wronged with these who have wronged me. And as you devise this way, patron goddess Athena, radiant among the Olympians, you present mortals like me with a gift, unique, generous, and valuable, one that no other has the skill to fashion, perhaps not even all-powerful Zeus himself.
Having ruled out Penelope and Odysseus as possible examples of ennobling suffering, we might ask if there's anybody in the story who could possibly be an example. The best candidate I could offer is one of the supporting characters, the sea nymph Calypso. She's a minor goddess. Sea nymphs are way below Olympians. But she's still divine, so she can control human behaviors. And she lives alone and she's lonely. She lives on an island close to the edge of the world. And after Odysseus' last ship is sunk, he alone manages to survive the shipwreck and to drift to the shore of her island, where she finds him. She cares for him. She falls in love with him. And she offers him immortality if he will be with her as her mate. He, however, still loves Penelope, and he honors that love in spirit, although Calypso is a goddess, so she can do with him as she wishes. But Odysseus remains faithful in spirit, and she keeps him there with her as her minion, so to speak. After several years, the gods and goddesses of Olympus find out what has happened, and they send their messenger Hermes with a command from Zeus that Calypso has to let him go home, send him home. Some of you, if you're my age or somewhere around there, you might remember a female vocalist, Suzanne Vega, who sang, I'm thinking mostly in the late 1980s, but she sang a song about Calypso. She told the story of Calypso and Odysseus from Calypso's viewpoint. And in its final stanza, she shares Calypso's feelings about it in these words.
My name is Calypso. I have let him go. In the dawn he sails away to be gone forevermore, and the waves will take him in again, but he'll know their ways now. I will stand upon the shore with a clean heart and my song in the wind. The sand will sting my feet, the sky will burn. It's a lonely time ahead. I do not ask him to return. I let him go.
Perhaps Calypso, with her aching loneliness, understands something of Odysseus' feelings of loneliness for his home and his family and his wife. As a goddess, she could extract a painful revenge, yet she sends him forth with as much grace as she can muster, perhaps out of a sense that some love that he has connects with her own feelings. One of the beauties of Unitarian Universalism and liberal religion generally is our focus on the positive in human experience. But when we over-focus on the positive, we can sometimes forget or perhaps deny that human suffering is another aspect of our lives. I believe that every human suffers in some way or another, and that if we do not include that in our religious experience, we're missing something that's part of our lives. Our task is not to deny its presence or to minimize it. Rather, our task is to acknowledge it and to help us work with it in ways that connect one another, connect each of us to each other. At least sometimes we have a choice in how we respond to suffering. We can choose to separate ourselves as we suffer, or we can choose to connect with others in our suffering. In Desmond Tutu's words, our suffering can embitter us or ennoble us. As we open ourselves to the possibility that suffering helps us understand ourselves and others, we learn from each other and we build a greater sense of community. So in closing, I simply ask you this. Have you personally experienced what Desmond Tutu calls ennobling suffering? Have you suffered in ways that have connected you to others? Have you been present with others as their suffering has connected them?
Thank you, Bill. We normally have a period of time following a sermon to discuss